Hello, it's August 14th and today is Wednesday and we are at our weekly Montessori Foundation webinar. And today's special guest is Christine Lowry, and her discussion today will continue on previous discussions that she's had with some new elements and new information that she brings to us. Welcome to all participants. If you're watching this by video, thank you so much for accessing the Montessori Foundation Library, which as a member you have access to. These weekly broadcasts are brought to you by the Montessori Foundation, an internationally global foundation set up and organized to support schools. My name is Tanya Reiskind, and I'll be your facilitator and host today. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Christine Lowry, our guest.
All right, thank you, Tanya. I'm glad to be here today. So we're going to be talking in a very broad overview way about the some trends in the field of special education, how that impacts us as Montessorians, and just really exploring the idea of the values and benefits of social emotional skill development with all of our students. So I want to start us off with this thought that the words that we use, the words that we use to communicate with one another, and even more importantly, in some ways, maybe the words that we use when we are self-talking or self-reflecting, really, really matter. We know that not just in Montessori, but in the broader field of education as well, that the increase in the numbers of students who learn and behave differently is very much increasing. In a broad, if you look at the most recent statistics on students K through 12 who have an IEP, it's gone up a full percentage point in the past 2 years. So that's a lot of young people in our country. You know, we're talking about students who maybe have experienced trauma. We are talking about students who have various kinds of learning issues, students who may have been identified as autistic or developmentally delayed, or all of these categories that we have. And in the past, this language, this vocabulary that we use to describe students has tended to, in a sense, separate them out from other typically developing students. The field of special education is changing rapidly. And with that, the vocabulary that we are using in special education is also changing and also evolving. So we tend to think of children who learn and behave differently as having a special need, as being exceptional learners, or being put in a category of exceptionality. More recently, these children have been described as having challenges. Really what we're looking at is this wide range of labels within the IDEA, the Federal Education for Children Who Have Special Needs Act. There are 14 different label categories that describe students. But what we're really seeing more and more in the field of special education is this idea that what we really are trying to provide for all students is full access, full participation, and providing them with the supports and the accommodations that they need to fully participate and to fully access a educational setting that they're in. So a lot of this has been driven by this actually research-based model of We've always kind of seen children who learn differently as having a deficit or they're dysfunctional in some way, or they have a disability. And these are all terms that have us thinking of there's something wrong with the child. And that's where we're starting to see this evolution of the child is the child. The child is who he is, and that each student we can see from a strength-based model, and this idea of difference as diversity, just naturally, normally occurring neurodiversity in the human species. And so when we begin to think in using those kinds of terms with ourselves, I think it really helps us to understand that there are many ways that we as educators can support all kinds of students. And to me, what's so incredibly amazing and beautiful about the Montessori system of education is that this is exactly where Dr. Montessori started in her work. All of us who are Montessorians have some notion of her background. And yes, she had her medical training as a physician, but when she became interested in children who learn and behave differently, um, and saw those children as not uh, children who should be put away as they were in her day, but that children who, if we could understand, if we could believe in ourselves and our ability to support them, could really make wonderful gains and really develop in an optimal way. And that's that is the whole evolution of the Montessori system of education. So it's very consistent with this idea of seeing students through a lens of their strengths and their perhaps differences and their diversity, and honoring and respecting that as something that we can work with. So the words that we use to talk to ourselves can really influence our thinking and our values and our beliefs. There have been a number of studies done over the past 5, 6, 10 years on teacher attitude towards students who learn differently. And it really has been found in study after study after study, including the one study that I could find looking at Montessori teachers versus non-Montessori teachers that Natalie Danner and her, I'm really sorry, I can't remember the other woman's name that she worked with, but Natalie has done some wonderful work in Montessori and special education. And what they found in their study was that the biggest obstacle for Montessori teachers feeling like they have the capability to work with a diverse range of students is their attitude of, I don't know how to do this. These children are special needs. I'm not special education trained. I don't know what to do. As though somehow these children are so fundamentally different from the other students that we teach. And that is the kind of attitude obstacle that is seen in non-Montessori educators as well, to a greater or lesser degree, interestingly, depending on when they got their education to become teachers. But the teachers who felt most able to work with a diverse group of students in their classroom were non-Montessori educators who have completed their teacher education in the past 6 to 10 years, let's say, because in their general education teacher preparation programs, they have been required to take at least one, usually 2 courses in working with a variety of needs. Mm-hmm. And we know that we don't have that in Montessori quite yet. Most Montessori teacher education programs really don't put kind of emphasis on working with diversity that for sure I'd like to see. Of course, I'm biased, but
Right.
it
So
should be
Christine, we have a number of participants,
great.
and so this would be a great time to invite questions,
Yes.
invite comments or thoughts, or even share what is your background? What do you feel confident and comfortable, or are you in the position of supporting others who are working with children who might not feel confident and comfortable? And what brings you to this point to try and learn more or try and understand where we are with working with children with non-standard needs or differences?
Yeah. I would also love to hear other people's experiences with the changing populations that you're seeing in your classrooms and in your school. And have you noticed a shift over the past however many years?
Mhm.
We're going to give you a moment to type.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Okay, while you're doing that, I will move on to the next slide. So, what we are seeing again in the broader world of education, and I happen to think by default, if nothing else, in the world of Montessori education, is an inclusion model. An inclusion model is one that really, as it says here, includes all learners in the general education classroom. About 85% of students K-12 who have an IEP are being served the majority of the time in the general education classroom. Now, these figures are always interesting to me because they tend to exclude early childhood. And as we see this growth in early childhood programs across the United States and across the world, it would be really valuable to have information about that, really, that subpopulation of children. But we know as Montessorians, and I'm hoping that you are feeling good about giving an input and being part of this conversation. We really are hoping that this will be a conversation today. That the largest group of diverse learners are children who have not been identified with an evaluation and a label and an IEP. There are large numbers of children that just seem different, that aren't, I hear teachers say all the time, kids aren't just like they used to be. And, we have heard teachers say things like 50% of my class has special needs. So, I'm interested in hearing from you all who are on the, who are live with us today, what your experience has been with that. Are we getting any comments yet, Tanya?
No, not at all.
Well, my goodness, come on, people. Okay, well, I will continue then. So, generally, the word inclusive education or inclusion classroom is a
Oh,
vocabulary.
hold on. I'm getting things now. Let me see if
Oh,
I'm maybe I'm not getting it. Oh, well, one question is, do you have any handouts?
any what?
Will there be a handout uploaded?
No, there's not going to be a handout because we're really not going to, this is really just a very, very broad overview. The last slide will include information on a course that the Montessori Foundation is offering. It starts, I believe, August 29th. That is going to be a 4-week course on developing social emotional skills with diverse learners.
Okay.
So rather than a handout of today's just really, again, it's just a broad overview. If, you know, what we hear is that people are asking for tools. They're asking for more knowledge. They're asking for more skills on how to do this and how do I work with students with differences. And that's in part what that course will be about. There's another course that we offer called Meeting the Needs of Today's Diverse Learners. That's a 6-week course, and it really goes in depth into how do you create a multi-tiered system of support, beginning with what we call universal best practices, going down to more targeted support for students who need that, and then looking at students who really have more significant needs. Maybe their behavior or their learning issues are more intense or more frequent than we tend to see in the general population of our classrooms. So there are a number of courses that the Montessori Foundation is offering that are maybe the kind of information that you're hoping to get from a handout. But can you tell more? What is it that you'd like to see in a handout or in a course? Well, we're waiting for that. Were there other comments, Tanya?
Not that I see at the moment.
Okay. All right. Well, I will continue.
Uh-huh.
And again, you know, please feel free to write in that chat line
We
that
have we have 11 participants today. So thank you, Jackie and Joe and Kathy and Kristen and Michelle for coming and joining us, and Blanca and Colleen, we thank you, and Dawn. So it's quite a group. So
good.
hopefully we'll get more questions and more information. I think
Okay.
okay, I've got a question here where do you think there is ever a point where the teacher has to admit that she cannot help a child? I truly believe that Montessori can work for every child, and I try my best to help every child. I have, with the help of our course, developed a multi-tiered support, which, let's see, getting the question. There is one boy, however, let's see if I can get the question. I'm not, one boy, however, who I have, it's a long message and I'm trying to get the whole thing. I'm trying to get the whole thing, so thank you. There's a lot of family issues. We've spoken to the parents. We've documented a lot. He cannot be in the class until further notice. And I have to admit that he needs further support.
Okay.
And I think the gist is that there's a lot of documentation, there's communication, and when does a teacher have to admit that she can't help a child?
And as so much about Montessori education, it's a gray area, right? There are very few absolutes, or very few. When you see this, then you know it's time to stop. You know, this idea that, and to your credit and kudos to you, the reason that you're here today is because you're always trying to add to your knowledge. You're always trying to gain new skills. You're always trying to add to your toolkit, right? So the maybe the differences in learning and behavior that we just were overwhelmed with in our first year of teaching. Once we've been Montessorians for 4 or 5 years, we feel much more confident and much more competent because we've had experience, because we've probably taken some courses or we've participated in some in-service. We're constantly gaining new knowledge, constantly learning new skills. I've always said I've been working with students who were were attending special schools because their needs were so intense, all the way to Montessori schools for many, 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 many years. And I absolutely know that the next time that I walk into a Montessori classroom as an educator, I'm going to learn something new that same day, even though I've been doing this for 30 years plus. So,
Mhm.
constantly learning new things.
Right. And Christine, this is also a place that, Jonathan Wolf and I are very committed to supporting schools and coaching and mentoring, as you know. And this is a place where we are finding so many teachers don't even know mentors within their own schools, who have a background or who have resources that they didn't even ask about because it just wasn't in the forefront of the conversation. But sometimes it's not about us and families, it's about taking our documentation to someone else and having them give us ideas about what we may not see, even though we've documented the observations and we've documented our non-judgmental, visual observations, and maybe we write down the words. But sometimes even having a second or third person read our observations is so helpful.
Or actually come into the classroom and observe the child themselves. So I sound like a running commercial here, and I don't really mean to be doing that. But we are also, through the Montessori Foundation, offering a very, very exciting opportunity that I don't believe is being offered anywhere else to the Montessori community. And that is an inclusive coaching cohort that is really going to bring together a group of Montessorians. I'll be facilitating that, wearing both my Montessori hat and my special education hat. And this group will be an opportunity for each participant to share very specific situations in their classroom and to have a group of colleagues to talk through that, to have that coaching, mentoring, working together and supporting one another opportunity. And of course, I'll be there to, suggest some strategies and add to the toolkit and add to the knowledge. But the real uniqueness, I think, of this opportunity is that it really is going to be an ongoing coaching opportunity where a group of Montessorians come together as a cohort, supporting and learning from one another, because we can all learn from each other. And that's
Yeah,
going to,
this is a really interesting question now from Michelle Kemp, who, thank you, Michelle, for coming. We always enjoy your involvement and investment. Her question is, would it be ethical to take observations of this child to a professional therapist, etc., without the parent's permission?
absolutely.
Unfortunately, as the head of school and his teacher, there is not really anyone I can bring it to observe him. Well, I mean, the truth is, you have to erase his name, you have to erase any conditions, but sometimes the general nature of things, if you have professional people, you're not paying them, but you can get an opinion. Like I would ask Christine. Christine, these are observations I've seen of a random child in my class. Can you help me with it, right?
In this particular case that Michelle is talking about, I would honestly be very hesitant to share that with anybody else without the parent's permission. just because I know that Michelle has had conversations with these parents. And, I think, Michelle, to more directly answer your question about when do we as educators have to say enough is enough, I think most of us do believe that Montessori is right for all children, but that old phrase, but it's not right for every family, really might be the case here. And if you have a family that is not putting the same kind of effort and energy and thought and care into their child as you are, then I think it's not, in my opinion, it's not really saying, no, we can't have the child here. It's saying, we can't work with your family because we need a team. And, right now, you're not really functioning as part of the team. And so we've gone as far as we can with your child. We really care about your child. We want what's best for your child. But we have gone as far as we can go without you coming on board. Now, coming on board might be a variety of things. It
Right.
doesn't necessarily mean so you must get your child evaluated.
Well, and Christine, let's put so that's one scenario. How about the scenario where the parent is completely on board, is crying in your office and is willing to do backflips?
Right.
Please keep my child, please keep my child. And we're saying, we're not the best place for we love you as a family, but it is out of our love and our support of you as a family that we will work with you to find a better situation for your family.
And yeah, and there is that. I do believe I've had some parents actually get upset with me when I said this, but I'm going to go ahead and say it anyway because I really truly believe it. I do believe that Montessori is for every child, but like so much in life, it's about the timing. And if a child is not yet able to benefit from being in an inclusive Montessori classroom where we are, as educators, gaining knowledge, gaining skills and tools, and doing everything we can, then if then maybe we aren't the best placement for that child at this time. And to say to a family, what you just said, Tanya, we really, we respect you, we respect your child, we care about your child, we would like to do everything we can to support your child, but right now, we would recommend that your child get more support elsewhere that we cannot alone give to your child. And this is where it's a it's tough. It's tough because we care about these children. We really do, and we do want to be able to serve all of them. If you have a child whose behavior, let's say, is so intense and so frequent that that child or other children in the classroom are getting hurt on a regular basis, then I don't believe that ethically you can allow other people's children to get hurt on a regular basis.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I had a student one time, the only student that I ever, I did everything to try to help this little guy. Um, and he was a biter. He was three, just three, but he was a biter, and he was biting little girls with blonde hair in the face. And even when we had him standing next to an adult at all times, the last time when he managed to even get away from that and bite a little girl in the face, I mean, um, it was one of those situations. I came to find out later after he had left the school that there were really significant problems happening in the home. Um, this child was a witness to. So, I hear your concern. I hear your care about this student, Michelle. And I think you just, you do the best that you can. And at some point, if the family is not willing to go along with you to explore what other supports could be put in place so that your child could stay here, then you just have to say, you know, I can't do it alone. And I
And
really,
Michelle says back, thank you, that helps. It is absolutely heartbreaking as I've tried so much to help this child. His brother has shown amazing progress with the tiered support system. However, I have had 3 children leave the class due to his violent outbursts, and it is destroying me to hear him say things like, I will kill you all and myself at 7 years old.
yeah,
Uh, I am going to speak to his parents again about getting him professional help. Otherwise, I cannot continue with him, as horrible as that is. I don't want to give up on him, but I have to care for myself and for others too.
exactly.
And this is, Michelle, you bring up this is such a powerful conversation in all of our environments because we want to be inclusive, we want to be kind, we want to welcome all. But at the same time, when is all of our effort on the one at the detriment of the many?
Right, and where that line is, I think, is the question. And that's why,
It's a squiggly line.
yeah, and you know, I mean, um, I mean, in the case that Michelle is talking about, it is a very extreme case, and you know, I happen to believe that we can, in fact, work with most students in a Montessori classroom. And we can't, it's when we have this expectation as Montessorians that I'm going to have a perfectly peaceful, normalized classroom. I mean, I'm exaggerating to make a point here, but, and it's going to happen within the first month of school, and everything is going to be lovely and peaceful, and everyone is going to get along. That's just not going to be the case. But
Right.
in this case, where this is a child who's clearly in a tremendous amount of pain, um, and you know, Michelle, the other thing to think about is that you are an educator. You are not a therapist. You know, you are not a family social worker to support this family in whatever it is that's going on. But that kind of behavior from a 7-year-old child is so beyond everything that I know that you have tried to do to help him. And you're not seeing really much of a dent in it. I know he's made some progress, but you're not seeing a lot of a dent in it. In order for him to stay at your school, you need more support. And if the parents are not on board with that, then you know you can't do it alone. You just can't do it alone. So um, you know that's a tough one. But it's when you know, and I do hear, and I know Michelle is not one.
We have another question that just popped up. I might have missed it, but we have another question from Kathy Fan. Thank you. How do you suggest we be inclusive of children that may require more support of attention without taking away from other children? Other children are understanding, but I find it hard to balance. Um, let's see, I find it hard to balance giving lessons to others when a particular child requires so much attention almost all the time.
So the short answer to that is probably in part why you are participating in this webcast today, that you want to increase your knowledge and your skills. There are many, 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 many things that we can do in a Montessori classroom that are consistent with our philosophy and our pedagogy to help a student with attention issues so that we don't feel like we are having to give all of our attention to that student all the time. So that's the idea with some of these courses that we're offering through the foundation, that as you gain information and you gain skills and tricks and tools to learn ways that you can support a student that maybe has attention issues, in a way that minimizes and prevents some of that behavior. So, when we're talking about inclusive education, we're talking about really full participation and full access. But the key part of that is with the supports and accommodations that a child needs to be able to do that. And those are supports and accommodations that are very consistent with Montessori education that we, in fact, as general educators in a Montessori classroom, can provide. So when we're talking about additional support, there are so many kind of built-ins in a Montessori classroom that if we're aware of seeing them in that way, we'll support that child, and we don't need to bring in somebody else, and we don't need to, I know a lot of teachers kind of default to, well, we need to get this child evaluated. And that's based on a really old kind of medical model. We don't really see it that way in special education these days. It's based on this medical model of if we can determine what the cause is, then we know what the cure is. But in reality, there's no one-size-fits-all program that's going to fit just because a child may have a particular label or be identified as having difficulties in a particular area. So,
Right. So Christine, you get to the heart and the key principles of what is the observation telling us to do. That's all we really need. What is I mean, if we go concretely, if a child is sitting there banging their head against the wall, and we observe 10, 20, child bangs head against the wall 5 times, what we have choice, right? We move the wall, we move the child away from the wall, or we keep observing, right? I mean, there's things that we can do, or we ask ourselves all the W's. What's going on? How is the environment working for the child? That's part of, and I'll let Christine take over here, but we don't ask ourselves what's wrong with the child. That's not the question we're trying to answer. We're trying to answer what preparations and what do we need to do to prepare an environment where the child either starts doing a different behavior or stops doing a behavior.
so let me add to that and take it one step beyond that. And I completely agree with you as that's a starting point. As you have more knowledge, however, you can begin to interpret behavior as communication. So with your example, you've got a child who's banging their head against the wall. That could communicate a number of needs. That behavior is serving a function for that student. And we want to the best of our ability, with our increasing knowledge, identify what function or what need is being met by that child's behavior. So what we do then is we come up with a replacement behavior. So in that case, let's say, for instance, that that child is having some sensory issues, and either the child is overly responsive to noise in the classroom, or is overly responsive to too much visual presentation in the classroom. Maybe that child has some internal uncomfortableness with balance or with the proprioceptive system. It's feeling your muscles and feeling your joints in space and where they are. And for a child that has that kind of difficulty, for instance, knowing where their head is and feeling comfortable with, physically feeling comfortable with where their head is, can be very difficult. And so, I might look at that and say, oh, what other clues can I see in this child's behavior? What are some other triggers that are going on? What are some other things that are going on with this child that might lead me to think he's got some sensory issues? And then what would be some tools? What would be some tricks that I have learned from taking some courses on how to help fulfill that child's sensory needs? And there's zillions of them in a Montessori classroom. There's so much that we can do in a Montessori classroom. But, in order to really do inclusion right, the number two thing. The first thing that we're finding in research, not just in Montessori, but in the world of broader world of education, is that teacher attitude has to be one of, I am willing to see this as diversity, and I am willing to feel uncomfortable enough to continue learning, and not kind of put it on the child, but take some ownership and some responsibility, and I'm going to do what I can to learn more to support this child. And then the other one is the need for educators to have knowledge and to have some skills and to have more tools in their toolkit. Mm-hmm. And, again, as I started off by saying, as Montessorians, we don't get that in our Montessori training, mm-hmm. specifically. So that's why I think it's so wonderful that the foundation is offering an opportunity. Michelle mentioned that she has been trying to implement the multi-tiered system in her classroom. Michelle took part in the Meeting the Needs of Today's Diverse Learners course, the 6-week course, where we talk about a multi-tiered system of support, and we talk about accommodations, and we talk about these supports, and we talk about what can we as Montessorians do to support the children that we see in our classroom, because we're going to have diverse learners. They're not going away. That group of children is getting larger. So yes, we need to gain more knowledge, and we need to gain more skills and have more tools. And one of those is helping children develop social emotional learning and development. To help them, it's one aspect of how do I support the students in my classroom. So I'll stop for a moment. Is there any other response, questions? Did that kind of get at what you were asking?
No new responses yet, but that doesn't mean they won't come.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. So this is a course, as I mentioned, this is a course that's going to be offered through the foundation starting the end of August, 4 weeks. It grew out of the course on meeting the needs of today's diverse learners, because we do have 1 week where we talk about the importance of social emotional skill learning and development, but so many of the participants in that cohort said, we don't know how to teach social emotional learning in the classroom. We don't know some tools and techniques. Tell us more. We need some strategies. So in response to that, this course was created that really targets and really hones in on how do we do this? What is it and how do we do it?
So Christine,
Uh-huh.
Kathy Fan says yes. We did address her question, and with resounding thank you and an exclamation mark.
Oh, yay. Oh, I'm so happy. Thank you. You just made my day.
And I want to thank you, Christine, for bringing social emotional learning to the table, because I think that we talk a lot about it. We talk about, I mean, when I was in training, many, many, many moons ago, we got the concept of the whole child, we got that concept of the circles and the rings, we got the concept of the spirit of the child and the inner child, and we got all of it in language, but no one really got to the meat of what we were trying to really get to. And now with so much research and understanding from a neurological perspective, from a social, emotional, culturally diverse perspective, I think that now we have some real key elements of what is social emotional growth. How do we nurture and guide social emotional growth, and how do we meet the child in front of us at where they're at, and what are some clearly defined markers for that individual that we want to discuss with parents, because the social emotional growth has to be a team effort as well.
And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about. That was just a wonderful, wonderful commercial for this course. Thank you, Tanya.
You're welcome.
So, again, this is something that we, not just Montessorians, but we're a little subgroup, but we're part of a bigger, broader picture that we can learn from. And the amount of, as Tanya alluded to, the amount of new knowledge, the amount of research um, in neuropsychology and the way the brain works and what does this whole child thing really mean has just expanded so much in the past 10 years. And you know, almost every day some new research study comes out or some new wonderful book comes out. And you know, it behooves us to keep up with that. And yet I know how difficult it is to do that when we're also teaching full time, or we're running a school full time, or we're doing both full time. And so, you know, again, that's why I think having these ways for at least our community of Montessorians to have an opportunity in an efficient kind of way to do a deep dive into some of these and to really learn some real specific strategies for what am I going to do in my classroom tomorrow to help this. So that's going to be about.
And
Uh,
I'm gonna put a plug in for Jonathan Wolf and I will be offering a course also, and it's going to be about the language that teachers use, the language of an empowerment, the language of self-awareness, the language of envisionment, and others. But I just want to share with you that, you know, on an earlier slide, Christine said language matters. And so our course is really going to hone in on language and how do we encourage the variety of learners that we will work with our language. So I look forward to seeing some of you take that course. It won't start until October.
that sounds fantastic, Tanya. What a
Thank you.
what a wonderful opportunity for people to take advantage of. That's great. Um, so what we'll be looking at and really what the components of social emotional learning, and as Tanya said, how do we know where each child in front of us is on this continuum, and how do we, you know, what kind of benchmarks, what kind of markers can we see that the child is continuing to develop. But I want to put this all in the context of our society has changed so much in the past 10 or 15 years. And it's just, you know, it feels like more and more and more things are speeding up. You know, there's just, you know, there's an atmosphere around us that's very different than it was a while back, right? And these changes are having an impact on us that we may not be entirely aware of, but they're also having an impact on our students and their families. So when Dr. Montessori talks in The Absorbent Mind about how children, especially young children, but now we know that all of us as children at any age that we happen to be as a child, that we are absorbing the culture that we find ourselves in. And as that culture changes from the way it used to be to the way it is now, our obligation as teachers, I believe, as educators, is to see that child in front of us, and also, as Dr. Montessori said, see the child who's not yet there. Because our ultimate goal is raising competent, confident, functional, happy adults that have powerful, strong relationships with other people, and are happy with their lives, feel good about their lives. So the five components of social emotional learning and development that we will be exploring specific techniques and strategies at each level of Montessori from infancy through middle school are: how do we help students become aware of their own feelings, of their own needs, of their own what's going on in them? How do we help them manage that? So the whole idea of self-regulation, of executive functioning, um, those kinds of issues, how do they monitor and evaluate their own emotions and then know what to do about it in a socially appropriate way? The whole idea of social awareness. Once we go from self to now others, how is that interaction beginning to happen? And the ideas of developing empathy, developing compassion, developing conversation skills as we develop relationship management. And how do we solve problems? How do we resolve conflicts with one another? And how do we do that in a responsible way that more and more and more our students are able to do independently? Kind of a responsibility that we can expect from a 3-year-old is going to be different. We just popped up. Can you still see my screen?
Yes, we're fine.
Okay, good. I just lost it for a second. There we go. Okay. The kind of responsibility that we can expect from a 3-year-old is going to be very different from that we would see from a 15-year-old, right?
And Christine, and years ago, well, always, we've done parent education workshops, and we do a lot of parent education up front in the beginning, when parents are with infants and toddlers and early childhood, because we have books written about touch points and critical things that children should be doing at certain ages and stages of development. But this gets to the heart for me of parents understanding the development of their own child, and helping them get through adolescence in ways that are allowing the adolescent to become self-aware and manage and help themselves with relationships at a very critical time in their development. And the way in which you approach this conversation and the way in which you look at components of positive social emotional growth, I think is really something schools should look at in terms of vignettes and pieces of workshops for all of their parents.
Absolutely, because we know that we have parents who are not particularly self-aware. We know that there are way too many adults in our society right now who don't know how to manage relationships and don't know how to solve conflicts in a way that's positive, that moves things forward rather than moving things backwards and further separating and dividing people. So, this is kind of a systemic issue in a way, if you want to really look at that big picture of it. So absolutely, I think this would be a wonderful opportunity for parent education, or I don't even like to call it parent education anymore because it implies that we know more than they do. But the idea of parent,
Partnerships.
yeah, that partnership, exactly, yeah. So the I think one of the things I want to mention about this idea of intentionally working on these 5 component areas is that we do have grace and courtesy in Montessori, and I hope that at every level we are teaching grace and courtesy. Those lessons might look different from an early childhood classroom, but certainly at the adolescent level, those students need lessons in grace and courtesy. And how are we going to function as a positive micro society in this classroom? But if somebody doesn't have self-awareness, if they don't have the ability to manage their own feelings and emotions and think to themselves, oh, this is a time when I could use that grace and courtesy lesson that I was taught, then you could do grace and courtesy standing on your head and twirling around. It's not going to really get at the level that we're hoping that it will, because of these different kinds of needs that we now know more about, and we know more about how to teach them. Same thing with the peace curriculum. It's a lovely curriculum, but if a student doesn't have specific tools and specific techniques to mediate a conflict with a peer, and they don't even have enough social awareness to see that they have some responsibility in that conflict, then how well are they going to be able to use some of those tools and techniques that we hopefully are teaching them with conflict resolution? So each piece of this, kind of like Montessori education, is interdependent, and we need to have all of these. So what we're looking at really is a teaching technique of intentionally modeling these components as adults in the classroom, of specifically teaching them with strategies, with lessons, with techniques, um, and then role playing them with the students right after that lesson or at a time when the technique doesn't need to be used in a way because there's something going on, but it's just a neutral, it's like any other activity in the Montessori classroom. Working with it, I'm going to use that word, playing with it, practicing with it, repetition. It's how students learn. It's how we as adults learn.
Mm-hmm.
And then going the extra step of embedding this throughout the day so that when a real life situation does come up for a student, we can say, hey, remember when we did that role play about
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is they're experiencing right now? And click them into that prior knowledge, that prior experience. So it's an ongoing, both intentional teaching and modeling, and using that then throughout the day as students need that. And it's a really critical part of helping the whole child grow and um, develop executive functioning and self-regulation, as I said, which is just a huge need that self-regulation wasn't even a term that was used 5 years ago that I know of, but now it's all over the place. Developing these social skills and these interactions that are positive, that bring people together instead of dividing people. It's so important, particularly with students who behave differently or learn differently, that they feel like they belong. These are students who generally are not understood by a lot of people. They're not accepted by a lot of people. There's this idea that they should be somewhere else, not in my class. But just having a sense of belonging and feeling safe and feeling accepted and respected is huge. It's absolutely huge. And there are ways that we as Montessori educators can, in a very intentional way, create that kind of atmosphere in our classrooms so that we are developing a peaceful, calm classroom that is less stress for us, honestly. This is not about creating even more work for Montessori teachers. Believe me, I well know we don't need more work. We need ways to de-stress ourselves. We need ways that we can kind of create this community that becomes more, in some ways, not self-sufficient, but that idea of, the Montessori teacher, I don't remember the exact quote, Tanya, you can help me out, but that, the teacher knows that she's done her job well when the children are functioning as though she no longer exists. That one?
Yeah, you've got it, Christine.
Like that. I'm not certainly not as articulate and eloquent as Dr. Montessori, but that's okay. It's the gist, right? That's what all of this is about: is how do we, as the adults, put all these pieces together so that our classroom starts to function as this peaceful, calm, cohesive place that really true learning can take place, that positive behavior becomes the norm, and it really is meeting the needs of the whole child. So that's an overview of, and you've heard about a lot of different courses today. So, Tanya and John's course sounds fantastic, starting in October. This course starts on August 29th and goes for 4 Thursdays from 7 to 8:30. There will be time in each session to talk about specific children, specific situations, specific concerns about your classroom. So it really truly is going to be responsive to strategies that you can use tomorrow when you go into your classroom. But I also encourage you to really look at, there was an email that was sent out this week that Tim Selden sent out about all of the courses that are coming up for the fall semester. There will be some additions, like Tanya and John's course, on there. But that would be a great place for you to look and kind of map out what's the knowledge base, what are the skills that I really want to focus on for myself and my own personal growth this coming semester as the school year begins.
Yeah, and share it with colleagues and people who've been in the, you know, we we're all required, to continue our education for some of us if we're in public schools. And so these are great opportunities because we do issue certificates for professional development hours. So many of you will be able to apply that to your own schools and your school districts.
Absolutely. And I do think that one of the things that is really, really special about us Montessori educators is how much we care. We're not just doing this for a paycheck. You know, that's just not who Montessorians are in my experience. And so this idea that we can learn from our colleagues of better, better is not the right word, that we can learn new ways, we can increase our knowledge, that we can continue to support these students that we care so much about and their families as well.
So Christine Heddle was here and she has had to leave, but she says, thank you so much for your time over the summer.
Thank you. And
And
thank you for being here.
we too appreciate your time. And we hope you've enjoyed the 1 hour format over the summer. If you think the 1 hour format works for you and resonates with you and is more ideal, or you want to share with us, please email Kathy Leach at the IMC Foundation, Kathy Leach at Montessori.org. And again, welcome to the weekly. This week's was developing social emotional skills with diverse learners, presented by Christine Lowry. And with that, we will sign off unless anyone has any more questions.
And we want to wish you all a wonderful, incredible, amazing school year.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
May your first days be joyful and calm.
And your middle days and your end days too.
And every day henceforth. So I don't see anything coming yet.
Okay.
So we will say goodbye and have a lovely, lovely day. And we appreciate all that you do for the children that you work with.
Absolutely. Take care, everyone.